Gracious Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you for the blessings that you bestow upon our lives. We thank you for the blessing of being able to gather together and open up your word and study and fellowship together. Father, we ask you, Father, for your grace and your mercy in our lives. Forgive us if we have sins, Father, that are yet still to be confessed. I pray that you would search each and every one of our hearts and reveal to us, Father, any hidden sin, any unknown sin, any defilement that is in us, that we might be able to walk wholly with thee, prepared, Lord, to stand in your presence and live. I pray, Father, for a greater conviction upon us with our relationship with you. And we look at the angels, Father, the angels in heaven, they veil their face rather than look at you and cry out, holy, holy, holy is Lord God Almighty. And I know that I am weak in that area, but I pray that we would have that experience and that relationship with you. We pray for a better understanding of the methodology and the rules and the ability, Father, to use it, that use the rules and apply, Father, that we can hear through the parables your voice speaking to us, so thus saith the Lord, that we might have greater and greater understanding and follow on all the way till the end, Lord. We pray, Father, for strength, and we pray, Father, for foreheads of flint. We just thank you for the blessing and the privilege of being a part of this great work. Father, I pray and lift up to you our sister Lana and our brother Jonathan as they're going to present the message tonight. We pray, Father, that your Holy Spirit would rest upon each of them, give them clarity of thought and clarity of mind. And I pray that each one of us, Father, be ready to receive a blessing from heaven above. We just thank you, Father, for everything that you're doing for this group in helping us, Father, to do the studies that we are and teaching and better understanding as we go through this process. That's also really doing a great work to unite us. And I'm just so thankful, Lord. We know that this is your work and not ours, and we are so thankful and blessed. So we thank you, Lord, and we praise you, and we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. So start sharing. Okay, I guess I would like to page. I would like to go over previous presentation so that we can understand Okay, I guess I would like to go over the previous presentation. Well, first of all, thank you very much for attending this presentation, and I'm really glad to see all of you. And we just want to go over the previous presentation of Brother Elder Tabo. So in the previous presentation, we went over we compared and contrasted Daniel 12:10, the wise and the wicked.
Lana,
Hello?
can you make that a lot bigger?
Okay.
It's like a tiny little square on the screen. That's way better.
So that we could we compared and contrasted the wise and the wicked described in Daniel 12:10, and we understood from using this method, we understood that there is two classes of people, and one class there's a lot more information about one class and a lot less information about the second class. So there is wise and there is wicked, and there is more information about wise and a lot less information about the wicked. But using this method of compare and contrast, we were able to derive the information that is there, but it's not easily seen, and it's not seen by plain reading of the Bible. So I just want to reiterate that this is Daniel 12:10, and this is about the wise and the wicked. And we were able to understand some of the things, and some of the things that we were able to derive are the fact that so there's two groups of people, the wise and the wicked. The wise and the wicked both the description is given that wise understand and the wicked do not understand. Wise are teachers and the wicked, the information is missing about the wicked, but by compare and contrast, we can understand that they are also teachers. We also know that from the text that wise are a class of teachers that understand, as the text itself plainly states that, and the wicked are also teachers, but they are false teachers, and that we derive from compare and contrast. Also, wise goes through the three-step process through which they are sealed and perfected, and purified, made white, and tried. And in the class of wicked, that there is nothing there's nothing in the text identifying the corresponding developments, but we know by compare and contrast, we know that they also undergo the three-step process and test, but which they fail, and therefore there's nothing said about it, and they fail that test. So we also went over to understand that the function of the to derive the function of the wicked and the function of the wise. About the wise, there is a lot more again, and a lot less about the wicked. In Daniel 12:3, the wise shine as the bright stars of the firmament, while the wicked, information is missing. The wise do the work of turning many to righteousness, and in the group of wicked, there is no information, but we know by compare and contrast that they turn many away from righteousness. And corresponding to the wise is as the stars forever and ever, and the wicked, we by compare and contrast, we derive that they are lost for eternity. So we were able also to compare the structure of Daniel 12:10, and we talked about the chiastic structure, where purified, white, and tried corresponds to the wise and them understanding, and wicked do wickedly corresponds to the wicked not understanding. So we were able to derive from this that the wise are wise because they understand, and the wicked are wicked because they don't understand. And some of the things that we were able to conclude is that righteous goes through the experience of being purified, made white, and tried, and this is accomplished through understanding. And in the context of understanding, here it's about understanding of prophecy. So therefore, the righteous goes through experience of being purified, made white, and tried through understanding of prophetic message. So wicked, another conclusion is that the wicked are wicked because they don't understand the increase of knowledge. And this chiasm emphasizes the importance of the increase of knowledge on Bible prophecy as being the thing that it identifies who is righteous and who is wicked, which is a very serious conclusion, that the wise are wise because they understand, and the wicked are wicked because they don't understand. Then we did the structural study of Daniel 12:3, where we looked at the tautological statement, and we compared wise, that they shine, and they that turn many to righteousness corresponds to stars, so wise corresponds with shine, and they that turn many to righteousness corresponds with stars. So in this repeat and enlarge, we understood that that it all comes down to a very interesting conclusion, that the wise are those that turn many to righteousness, and they shall be teachers through eternity. So this was another example of was a very good example of how the structures themselves are also parables. Then we looked at Daniel 11:40-45 and compared the verses, verse 40-41. to understand that overflows in verse 40 and overthrows in verse 41, they are both present. So whatever the verse 40 was talking about, relating to the many countries, in relating to the countries, is also true in Daniel 41, in verse 41, relating to the glorious land. So he also overthrows and overflows the glorious land. So we were able to also to define what overflows mean. We concluded that overflowing is to overflow is to completely inundate and completely cover an object or the subject that it's talking about. So now today we want to talk about, okay, one moment, screen 2. Okay, do you guys see this now? Okay. Today we want to continue study of Daniel 11:40-41, and to try to understand the some of the concepts such as chief and look at the verse 40-42 entire line as a parable. So verse 41, 42 that we're going to deal with here is that he shall enter also into the glorious land, and many shall be overthrown, but this shall escape out of his hand: Edom and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So comparing and contrasting generates, so some of the conclusions that we have already made from previous 2 studies is that comparing and contrasting generates new light, the information that is not plainly seen, not seen upon plain reading. But here we were looking at the God's word from the perspective of parables, and we're not only looking at the symbols in the verse or the text to compare and contrast, but we are required to investigate the structure of the text itself. So that's what we did in the previous in our second study. Then we, in connection with the verse 41, the word also is a bridge that tells how the verse 41 is related to 40. So now we understood the meaning of the verse of the word overflown, and we understand it to be that it means to be completely inundated. So the king of the south was completely overflown. He was completely conquered. And looking at this perspective we just laid out, it has implications on how we understand things, on how we understood things before. So if we look at the verse 41, 42, that he shall enter also into the glorious land, and many shall be overthrown, but this shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So verse 41 brings to view Edom, Moab, and Ammon, as we have discussed in the previous presentation, that Edom, Moab, and Ammon represent a group of people that is in the world. And this group of people escape out of the king of the north's hand. And we identified what it means to escape out of the king of the north's hand, and who this Edom, Moab, and Ammon are. So we know that they are a class of God's people who understand to be the 11th, who we understand to be the 11th hours workers, who escaped from the papacy at the Sunday law, or between more exact, between Sunday law and the close of probation. So identification in relation to Ammon, chief of the, so there is a specific, something that has been specified in the text is that the chief of the children of Ammon. And that's what we want to talk about now. So in Strong's, the word chief comes from H7225, and it means first fruit or first in order. So in verse 41, the chief of the children of Ammon represents the first group of this class of people that escape from the hand of the king of the north. And in verse 42, he stretches his hand also. This word also tells us, again, as in previous study, that what we see in 41 is what we see in 42 as well. As the king of the north conquers the glorious land in verse 41, it is going to do the same thing in Egypt in verse 42. And by compare and contrast, we see in the verse 41 that there is a group who escape. So what they be in the verse 42, there must be a group of people who escape, a group of people in the glorious land. Is it stated in the text? No, it is not. But we know it must be there by comparison. So let us bring the principle of natural illustrating the spiritual. When you look at the operations of agriculture, you have the first group. So what must first group and what must follow? Since you have a first fruit means that you have harvest.
Yeah, there has to be a second group then. Is that what that means too, though?
Yeah, So since the first group is the first fruit, then that means that there follows a bigger group, a harvest. And so by comparing and contrasting, we see that there is a group of people who escape, and they are the first fruits of this class of people. And in verse 42, now Egypt of the world is being conquered. So there must be a group of people corresponding to the first group in Egypt. There is the harvest. The harvest is much more abundant than the first group. So we know that this class of people, the majority of them are seen here in the history of verse 42. And we can derive by comparing and contrasting. And we can see even if they aren't stated in the text. So now we want to move on to the verse 40 and 42 and look at it as look at this whole this whole line as a parable. And the verse 42 goes as follows: He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So we see here another example of repetition and enlargement. It says that the king of the north shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So the second statement goes in the reverse order, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. The action of the stretching forth his hand correspond with not escaping. So you got it, right? That he shall stretch forth his hand upon the countries, and here's the countries, the land of Egypt, which is a country, shall not escape. So the stretching forth his hand corresponds to the countries, and not escaping. No, stretching forth his hand is upon the countries. So this action is done upon towards the countries, and not escaping done to Egypt or present in Egypt. This stretch forth his hand corresponds to not escaping. So when king of the north stretches forth his hand, the Egypt or the countries do not escape. So this is another tautological statement, but in the second, another repetition enlargement, but in the second statement, the symbols and the subjects are flipped around and structured differently. So in this repeated enlargement, when he stretches forth his hand, they don't escape, and the countries are Egypt, and this becomes significant. So we want to keep in mind that countries equals are Egypt. So when you look at the second part of the verse 40, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. And the king of the north shall come against him. Who is him that the king of the north comes against? It is the king of the south. So the south is being conquered and the country shall be overflown. So now here we have the structure of the verse 40 to 42 is that the south corresponds with the countries, and the countries corresponds to Egypt, and the Egypt is in the south. So if you look at how the conquest of these three obstacles is presented in the text, in verse 40, it's south, then countries overflown, then middle point. And in verse 41, it's the middle point, then countries, and then Egypt being taken. So Egypt, so we also said that Egypt is the land in the south. So now we see that there is a chiastic structure of this whole passage. But when we bring the verse 42, which is the repetition and enlargement, according to this tautological statement, the countries are Egypt. So since this is the picture of the verse 42 and the verse 40 being mirror image of the 42, what are we to understand of the king of the south? That the king of the south are the countries of the king of the south, and they must be the same thing. And that's one of the proofs of the king equals the kingdom. So in verse 40, it is understood that, and often presented, that the king of the south and the countries are the. So this is how it used to be before. This is how we used to understand before, that in verse 40, that the king of the south and the countries are two separate entities. But according to the structural parable that we see they are the same thing. And the king of the south is countries, which brings us to a point which requires us to look back to the history, because if you remember, in the Time of the End magazine, the time of king of the south is completely defeated and falls in 1989. He's no longer part of the picture from 1989 and on. So when we come to the post 9/11 history and we understand that we are still in the history of the verse 40, we're looking forward to the conquest of the next obstacle, glorious land. And then we arrive to 2016, and in Wales, in a course of studies, the movement has understood from the studies of Daniel 11:16 that that the conflict between the king of the south and the king of the north is not over, and that in 2016 it was concluded, it was I wouldn't say predicted, concluded or foreseen, that the conflict between king of the south and the king of the north was understood to happen in the future. And this conflict is represented as Battle of Raphia, where king of the south would be the winner. Then the following conflict represented by the Battle of, then the following was the conflict represented by Battle of Panium. So this conflict would be won by king of the north. So now we're talking about we have a discrepancy. In Time of the End, we're talking that the king of the south is completely defeated and fallen in 1989. But yet in 2016, we see that there is coming Battle of Raphia, where the king of the south is going to win. and Battle of Panium, where King of the South is going to lose. So now standing here in 2000, so now the movement has was confronted with a problem. That if we understood the Time of the End magazine to be correct, then King of the South is supposed to be completely destroyed at the time of the end, which is 1989. And if he was destroyed at the time of the end, how is that he's still there, winning at the Battle of Rafia and losing at the Battle of Panium? How do we reconcile this discrepancy? And what was the simple reconciliation? And the simple reconciliation is that King of the South didn't die, but then it would show that the Time of the End magazine was false, was wrong on this subject. So we understood that this message is unsealed, so that the message is unsealed at the time of the end is like a seed presented all the essential elements of that which is unfolded in the following history. And it was very uncomfortable that it would be so wrong at such a crucial point. And for a long time, the movement somehow dealt with it, but there was no logical explanation to this discrepancy. But if you look at the methodology of the parable teaching, it reveals itself as a method that is able to correct our thinking, to reconcile this discrepancy. So we see that in 1989, King of the South, according to the Time of the End magazine, he dies. But in 2016, it was understood that the King of the South is going to win at the Battle of Rafia and is going to lose at the Battle of Panium. And so when you look at this parable, it presents a different picture than that is laid out in the Time of the End magazine. So since the King of the South, the King of the South is countries, and the justification revolved around the idea that the King of the South and the countries are separate things. So what fell at the time of the end was countries, and the King of the South never died. So this is how the movement has reconciled the discrepancy. But this reconciliation was not fail-proof. So when what does this parable teaches us? But when we actually look back and compare the history of the King of the South and history of King of the North, we figure out that there is also a parable in comparing of the histories of those two subjects. So King of the South is countries, and if King of the South is countries, it is the King of the South that must overflow and be overflown. And to be overflown is to be inundated, to be drowned and completely covered. So the King of the South did follow the time of the end, and this contradicts the rationale. So it begins to lead us toward the correct. But parable teaching begins to lead us to the correct understanding how to conceptualize the history of the time of the end and the history of the King of the South. So here in this small cartoon, you can see this the structure of the comparison between this whole line of 40 to 42. We developed understanding of the King of the South based on this contradiction in the Time of the End magazine, where King of the South dies, and that at Rafah he's still fighting the King of the North. And this contradiction led us to incorrect conclusion about Time of the End. And the conclusion was that that the Time of the End magazine was wrong. But when we view the same subject from the perspective of parables, we see that we are led in a different direction. The chiasm tells us that the South is countries. To round off this picture, let us look at another parable, which is verse 40, as a parable on its own. So in verse 40, we see a different kind of parable. Remember, we said that we can compare and contrast scriptural symbols in the verse or passage, or we can identify parables within the structure of the text or passage. But we can also we can also study, we can also look at the symbols within the passage. We can compare and contrast not only the characteristics of the symbols, but we can learn a lot from comparing, contrasting the histories of the symbols. This is a different thing, because the histories that go beyond their presentation in that single verse that we're looking at. So when we lay out their histories, we can compare and contrast those histories and derive and look at it as a parable and derive an information from that. So what is the history of the king of the north represented as papacy? So here we're moving on to make a comparison of the histories of the king of the subjects of this passage as king of the north and king of the south, and we start with king of the north. In the history of king of the north, in 1798, the king of the north receives a deadly wound. I guess we're basing it, we're looking at it, that the natural illustrates the spiritual, and to suffer a deadly wound and die is not the same thing. So you suffer a deadly wound, but the effect may not follow right away. And you suffer a deadly wound and you die subsequently. So in 1798 is when the deadly wound is inflicted. But the question is, when do we see King of the North die from this deadly wound? And the death follows the deadly wound. So in order to understand when this death takes place, we must bring a principle to bear upon this parable. And the principle is in Daniel 2. In Daniel 2, Daniel is interpreting the dream to Nebuchadnezzar. He tells him that these four metals are four kingdoms. But then he tells him, you, Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold. So here, Daniel presents that the Nebuchadnezzar is the king of the kingdom. Nebuchadnezzar, king of the kingdom, is also kingdom. So the king of the kingdom, king is the kingdom. But here in Daniel 2, the king and the kingdom is connected. So this principle is also found in the Spirit of Prophecy, but the Spirit of Prophecy passage relates directly to the history that we're looking at. So in Manuscript Releases, volume 8, page 924, I think it's 524. Okay, so Ellen White was in France and was visiting a cathedral in Valence, France. And she says, so she looks at the bust of the Pope Pius, and she says that he was the one. So here was who was led into captivity and died in captivity. Here was the one marked in history who received the deadly wound. So here she talks about an actual remains of Pope Pius, and refers to him as of being the one who is being spoken of in the Revelation. So when we bring the above mentioned concept, we can make like a cartoon that he receives the deadly wound in 1798 and finally dies in 1799, but resurrects at the end of the world. So when we compare the history of King of the North, and we have the reason to expect a similar pattern. So King of the North in 1989 suffers deadly wound, and it takes 2 years. And in 1991, the official dance happens, where Gorbachev resigns and the Soviet Union is dismantled. And this thing that we derived from the compare and contrast from the parable methodology is that if there is a resurrection, deadly wound, death, and healing of the wound and resurrection at the end of the world for the King of the North, then there should be we know that there is going to be death, deadly wound, death, and the wound will be healed and the resurrection will happen based on the parable methodology. So let us review. In the Time of the End magazine, it is stated that the King of the South died in 1989. But in 2016, we understood that the King of the South is going to win the Battle of Rafia. But he is dead according to the Time of the End magazine. How do we reconcile these two statements? How do we reconcile these two ideas? When we look at the parable from the structure, when comparing the histories of the King of the North and King of the South, we can see that the King of the South did die, and he really and truly died in 1989. He dies, he's buried, but experiences resurrection. And so the King of the South is, you can mark the resurrection of the King of the South in 2004, which is when Putin begins to act like a dictator in earnest. We also said that king is the kingdom. So Putin is the king of the resurrected King of the South, which is going to fight the King of the North at Rafia. So when did Putin come to power? He came to power in 1999, beginning of the resurrection. But the full resurrection happens in 2004. So what is the implication of this for the Time of the End magazine and how it is presented in the verse 40? The Time of the End magazine is correct to say the King of the North died at the time of the so the Time of the End magazine is correct to say that King of the South died at the time of the end in 1989. It correctly identifies the King of the South, correctly identifies the death of the King of the South at the time of the end. But now we have an increase of knowledge, which tells us that although the King of the South died at the time of the end, it must be resurrected according to the parable of the histories of the King of the South and King of the North. And that the general picture shows that the Time of the End magazine was correct. The discrepancy has been reconciled by the structural comparison of the histories of the subjects, and this structural comparison of the histories involved looking beyond the passage that we have studied. So we had to bring in the history of the King of the South. We have to by comparison, we could compare and say that King of the South is also resurrected at the time of the end. So that confirms the Time of the End magazine was correct, all in all. Okay, I guess that's all I have. Do you guys have any questions?
I had a thought while you were presenting about the chief of the children of Ammon being the chief, meaning the first group. That would be like a first fruits too, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it has actually the meaning. The meaning is the first fruits.
Because my studies, that one that I was doing on Achaia, New Testament, Achaia was representing the United States. And in somewhere, there's like 2 places where it writes that these 2 individuals were the first fruits of Achaia. That's the only place in the Bible where it says a literal place where first fruits come out of. Thought it was interesting.
Yeah. I wonder what are these first fruits? I mean, do we want to, I guess it's a, it's not essential for our understanding, but we could already see that there's people who are vocal and who understand the right from wrong now, and who are conveying these ideas. Yeah. So, but you know,
I was wondering when you were going through that, does that mean, unless I missed it, does that mean that they actually do a work?
I think so, because
if you're, go ahead, you say your thoughts.
Yeah, because if you compare and contrast in the history of the God's people, the priests are doing the work. So the priests are the first fruits, yeah. Then
they do their work after they're harvested. Because a harvest is a coming out, an understanding of something, a separating of old messages you had in your brain to a new understanding of new truth. I thought that's what a harvest is. But I think that's 2 separate models of when you do a work, you're not representing a plant that's just in the ground waving around waiting for something to happen to you. So the going to work part might be a part of a different model. Maybe it still fits. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe on the building model or something. I don't know. Because the other thing that I know Tess said was when it comes to the Levites and the Nethinims, she treated them like babies. She said they just need to be fed and put to sleep. So I don't know.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it was Holland where she said that. Where she went really, I think she referred to it in the German, I don't remember which videos, but she said she went really thorough into that. I think it was a video in Holland.
Sounds familiar. I think I saw that.
Yeah, but it was burned into my brain because I thought that if the Levites come in before Sunday law, that means that they help the priest do a work from Sunday law to close of probation. But she said, no, they're like babies. They just need to be fed and put to sleep. And I was like, what?
Wow.
Priests are the ones doing all the work all the way through nonstop. It's a big, big calling.
I'd have to go back and watch that one because I have a lot of questions on that myself anyways, because throughout you always have the Levites.
Elaine, I can hardly hear you.
I was just about to say that. Sister Elaine, you sound very far away.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but it's faint.
Oh, I don't know why. I'll try to speak up really loud. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's better than what it was.
Okay. Because in 2 Chronicles 29, actually throughout the Bible, the Levites assist in the work. So what does that mean?
Depends on the model and the perspective you're looking at it.
Yeah, correct answer.
Depends on your application. So that's the thing, is that you can't just, that's hard for me right now because there's many things I want to do that with, and you can't just randomly get from here and from there and try to slap it on there. You have to carefully go through it. Maybe we could do that Sabbath with that.
Yeah, because they do. That was their, and then the Nethinims are the Gibeonites, and they become the doorkeepers. You know what I mean? They become the doorkeepers, the hewers of wood and the doorkeepers, right? Or the drawers of water, I think.
What do you think is the since natural illustrates the spiritual, what do you think that is, them being doorkeepers? What does doorkeeper do?
I don't know, but I'm waiting for Ezekiel 40 and 40 to 45 to open up, because I think that's where a lot of those answers are. In that sanctuary service that takes place.
Are we putting a sanctuary service officiation on the line though? because that's where that would come in. If we made
Surely
a
not
model.
literal. Surely not a literal.
No, I'm
Yeah.
saying spiritual.
Okay. Yeah, I figured you were. I wanted to make sure you knew I wasn't saying literal.
So if you would have that on a line, because we don't have that, so you can't have it, I don't know, because I thought that the priests, they get the groups ready here, but then they're selected as, are they priests here or are they priests here because they're going to be priests in heaven? Because that's where the temple is and where the work is going to be done. So I'm wondering.
I think, I used to, this is, and this is, I'm a new to this, but this is my opinion. And you can take it with a grain of salt. That I used to think that the priests, their function is, it's like doctor. You're good as long as it's on earth, as long as there is a disease. Once you're in heaven, there is no such thing as a doctor. But I think I was deeply wrong, because this study actually of the wise shining as the stars forever and ever shows that they are teachers forever and ever.
That's
And
what
that in it,
Tess said. Tess said that we'll be spending the rest of eternity teaching everyone. The priest will.
so, and that in itself is the now I see that it's a very important function. You would not be able to to gain the necessary experience when you're in heaven, when somebody tells you how it's supposed to be and how it all goes or connected. You're not necessarily, you're the student, you're not the teacher, because you haven't been there. You don't have a first-hand experience of all the things that were going on.
Yeah, and the other thing, because I've been transcribing a couple of videos from France that I hadn't before even looked at. All of history has been progressing. Like when it comes to the equality and the rights lines with racism and sexism, she was very clear, you can't break those up into line upon line, because that's what the South did. And they said Alpha Glorious Land had slavery, that means Omega Glorious Land has to have slavery. She said these issues have to be progressive. So what it shows you is 6,000 years of progression from start to finish, and we're living at the end where it's all breaking open, and slowly over time people got more rights, and now is the time where all the rights are being restored. And you have this 6,000 year history, and we here at the end, knowing what we know, we have to understand the whole thing. So then later on in the presentations, when she was talking about dress reform, and she said, you're going to have Moses that's going to have to sit at the feet of Sister Christiane or whatever and ask her, what happened, because she's a priest. He might be very surprised that a female is a priest, but it's going to be the priests now who have to understand the whole 6,000 year history that are going to have that knowledge. And everyone on this planet, the whole reason it existed was for this final finale, and everyone's going to want to know what happened. So it's going to be like nothing you can even comprehend. The people who are here at the end, Ellen White said, those people who are going to live at the end of this earth's history, like there's not even words. So I think we are going to end up teaching like our understanding, because we don't have time. There's going to be a short time for Levites and a short time for Nethinims. I don't think there's going to be time to give them anything. I don't think we ever taught that we could give them everything. So whatever
That's
they
amazing.
get is a condensed little package. And so in heaven is where everything is. We're going to go slowly over everything forever.
It's amazing too, because they're still gonna they're going to be under such a conviction that they will turn to God. And granted, they're going to be learning as they go on, but the fact that they'll get into heaven, and the Bible tells us that sin will never rise up again. They didn't have the experience we had. They came straight from their sin to salvation, and perhaps then laid to rest. And yet they'll live in heaven, and according to the Bible, sin will never rise up again. The other point I was going to make is that the angels in heaven, there's a rank in angels too. You guys have all read that before, right? That they have different ranking. I think you can read it in Truth About Angels, but I'm sure throughout her writings, because I think Truth About Angels is a compilation. But there's different ranks. We'll just look at Lucifer. He had a high-ranking position, right? So there were high-ranking positions. So the people that go will have various rankings.
Yeah, they're all same in value, but they're all going to have different jobs, basically.
Good study,
Yeah.
by the way. Praise the Lord.
Oh, thank you. Thank you also to Brother Tabo.
Yeah.
Whose study is this? So I guess I pass on if we have nothing else to talk about relating to this subject.
Yeah, I have one quick question
Yeah.
regarding shining and it being a synonym for teaching. What do you think about, we're getting close to November 9th, and what Sister Adriana just brought up, that it's the priests that do the work.
Yes, the stars shine especially at night when it's dark, and the darkness happens at midnight. Yeah.
Right, but my question is referring to the shining. Do you think these, it's still a lot of videos a lot of people haven't watched, and we're getting close to November 9th, and then November 9th comes. Do these videos then become non-important to us, or like we can't gather light from them, or do you think we'll still be able to go back and watch?
I thought I've heard that before, actually, and I can't remember where I heard it, but Parmenter said something about that a long time ago. I don't know exactly what he said.
And if you look at the progression, yeah. So I started listening to Jeff's presentations in 2010, 11, something like that. So now, and when I started, in more systematic way, started following this movement. All the videos that I still kept referring, I went back and started studying back the old videos that I discovered. And when I started talking to people in Bible study group, I was attacked viciously by people saying that you're presenting completely, the views that we have already, figured out. So was it light in the past? It is light. It is a perfect light for that time. And just like in this Time of the End magazine, it seemed like it was out of date, but it is truthful, it is correct. We just need to know how to understand it. So whenever we understand certain concept or a certain subject, we need to understand in when it was given, and to the situation surrounding this, the time and the time and the situation, and often even geography. So I don't believe that it becomes completely obsolete, but it does become outdated. Not to say outdated, but
Could I put a thought out there?
Yeah.
Because this dispensation, something happened that didn't happen in any of the other dispensations. And I think God was trying to get us to the point that we were at right now, because what happened is what Parmenter has been saying, we're formalizing our methodology. And this methodology is what's going to make everything we do from now on correct. And we're not going to have, because a lot of the problems that we had, a lot of understanding that we changed was stuff that we ought to have known from the beginning, or was stuff that was making a misapplication of, like we've seen with the huge split. Some of the things that were being taught and some of the ways things were being applied was because we had a kind of an idea of a methodology, but we didn't have the rules hammered down. So there was misapplication happening. But these lines, because of the methodology that was used correctly on them, I don't think they're going to ever be wrong from here. I think it's just going to continue to increase. It's going to continue to increase in knowledge and information.
So it's like being a foundation. So all this,
exactly.
And it's also the jewels, I would think, then the jewels that are being put back all in the right place.
Exactly. That's good. Yeah.
And they're shining 10 times brighter.
Didn't Jeff refer to Parmenter as the dirt brush man?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah.
Yes,
I
he
suppose
did.
he's taking that back.
He said that the dirt brush man can clean up his mess.
Because from here, what also is happening is this kind of, I don't know if it's right now November 9 or if it's the time period between Raphia and Panium, but it's like a kind of a going over the hill situation, because this whole time period we've spent learning new methodology and learning this new message and how it works. From here, we're going to have, I think, like Sister Tess said, some sorting out to do with trying to continue to formalize it and get it perfect so that everyone can use it right. But once that happens in the next quick little bit after November 9, then it's the priest's job to start teaching everything that we know. And so from now, it's going to go to a different group. I don't think they're going to understand it on the level we did, but the information is going to start being disseminated. So I think it's going to start to look completely different from what we've seen.
So if we, by the grace of God, are part of that group, you guys know what we get at Midnight Cry?
Understanding? What do you mean?
Well, yeah, but I mean, I'm trying to think of how to phrase the question. At the marriage of Cana, what did they get at the last?
The best wine?
The
best doctrine?
Wine. Yep.
Yeah. And it sure seems to be that way, because I was talking to my mom earlier. I had a hard time sometimes with things Jeff taught and the way he taught them, and I was trying to, memorize all the lines and everything. But when Tess came out with this, I mean, the way she's organized, it's like everything made sense. And then with Parmenter adding his knowledge to it, it's just like this compounded explosion of amazing.
So by all of us learning the methodology then individually, with desire and effort and prayer to understand it, that we're in our practice that he's putting us on now, we're going to be, with this practice, we're going to be skilled at it. We're going to be gaining skills at it, which is going to be part of what plays that role when he saves the best wine for last. So we're going to be, and it's probably going to go back to that verse, that Spirit of Prophecy quote I read a long time ago, when we're going to open up our Bibles and we're just going to read it plainly. We're going to know the history, we're going to know the application, and we're just going to say it, because that's what she's actually doing when she does a lot of this stuff, just laying it out plainly.
I also think, that we will get some kind of instruction of what we would be presenting to the Levites, for example, or to Nethinims, because I'm sure that we will not be presenting this.
No, it's not this. It's the whole issue of church and state.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And that's why we needed to have it right, because we're out there teaching everybody, telling everybody they got to keep the Sabbath, and it wasn't about the Sabbath. So
the lines are for us to understand, to conceptualize the truth.
You know what I think?
It.
In Gideon, Judges chapter 7, when they, I think that Judges chapter 6, I was drawing it up on a line and took some notes and went through a bunch of the definitions. And what I'm getting out of that is that's Parmenter at 9/11, progressing through that period of time. And at 2014, I think is when you go from 32,000 to 10,000. And then I think it's 2019. I might have that wrong. Prior to that, when he separates out more of the group, I think that's 2014 to 2019, where he then takes them and it says to prove them, and it has to do with how they drink their water, right? He takes them down to the water, and then it's how they drink their water, but he takes them down to the water to prove them. And you go and look up that word, and he's going to test them and purify them. And so what we're experiencing is this purification process by how we drink our water. And then after that, it says that, and then the Lord says, I will then say, who goes with you? And I'll say, who goes home?
Well, I'd hate to break up the party, but
We got to get you started, yes.
I don't want to end up on night 3. Good conversation though. So this is part 2 of World War I, and we've all gone over it before. So this is revision, and hopefully it makes more sense. I tried to get everything all on one program, so I'm not trying to jump around again. All right. So we have looked at the history of the Third Diadochi War and then moved into the history of World War I. Can you guys see the chart all right, or is it too small? Because I can't really get it much bigger.
I can see it. I don't know about anybody else.
Well, I'll leave it until someone complains. So I would suggest a key cause in the history of World War I would suggest a key cause is the Bosnian Crisis. We see Austria-Hungary has this simmering tension with Serbia. The US has had a similar tension with Iraq. We find Austria-Hungary takes control of Bosnia, a sphere of influence Serbia had wanted. The US took control of Kuwait, a sphere of influence that Iraq had wanted. And Russia is too weak to support their ally Serbia, and Russia is too weak to support their ally Iraq. And we saw that with these 2 battles that had happened much in the same way, and Russia being on the losing end, having just lost a war to Japan in this battle, or in this conflict, and Russia losing the Cold War here. And they're also coming out of a revolution on both of them, so it left them too weak to defend their ally. In this case, it was Serbia, and in this case, it was Iraq. So, oh, that keeps resetting. That's gonna be fun. So they've lost a war and they're suffering from revolution. It connected the 1908 Bosnian Crisis to this history of the Gulf War. We saw that out of this crisis in World War I, it developed a terrorist organization called the Black Hand. So that's right here. And out of this crisis here in the Middle East, we see that it formed Al-Qaeda. On June 28, 1914, the terrorist organization, the Black Hand, launches a terrorist attack against Austria-Hungary, and they assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And this is a terrorist attack. Al-Qaeda, which developed out of this conflict down here, launches a terrorist attack against the United States, the two-horn power, and that was 9/11. The Black Hand assassinated the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The Austrian government for many years had wanted a war with Serbia. They had been wanting this war for a long time. The Italian Prime Minister in 1914 said in a telegram that the assassination of Franz Ferdinand was the excuse for war, but not the cause of the war. They had already wanted a war with Serbia. In the 8 years between 1906 and 1918, the Austrian general Hotzendorf had asked for a surprise war with Serbia more than 25 times. They had wanted a war with Serbia. This only gave them the excuse. When they want that war, they are facing the Triple Entente. It is the threefold enemy. Austria-Hungary sends an ultimatum to Serbia. They tell Serbia to follow these lists of demands or there will be war. The rest of Europe feels that Serbia has fulfilled the list of the demands. The rest of Europe does not feel that the war is inevitable. In fact, many of them feel that there will be no war. Austria-Hungary sent Serbia an ultimatum. Serbia had fulfilled most of them, but not all. The other leaders thought that this was enough to avoid a war. Some of them were taken by surprise when 1 month to the day after the terrorist attack, Austria-Hungary invaded Serbia. Remember, Serbia is under the sphere of influence of Russia, and this begins World War I. So again, we'll just have a look at the map to remind us who's who. So Austria-Hungary is invading Serbia, which is down here. And then we have Russia, the UK, and France, which is the triple entente. And then this is the triple alliance right here. Okay, find my spot again. After the terrorist attack of 9/11, the US apportioned blame to Iraq. They had long wanted a war with Iraq. 9/11 was just the excuse. It was not the cause. Now, I don't know if you guys remember this or not. Does anyone know why they wanted the war with Iraq at that time before the 9/11 happened? I don't think Tess mentions it, but
I think I recently read about it, but I am drawing a blank. But I know that they always wanted to do it. They wanted to take out dictators.
Oil. Was it oil?
those are part of it. But I remember, okay, so we know that there was an Iraq war in 2003, but there was also the Iraq war that was going on in the early 90s. And George W. the First was the one who had the war in Iraq then. And Saddam Hussein tried to, I can't remember how he did it, but he tried to have George Bush Sr. assassinated. And so George Bush Jr. didn't like that, and he always wanted to go and take out Saddam Hussein. So he wanted to have that war. This was something that he knew before he was even elected.
Oh yeah, that was in the Michael Moore movie. He mentioned that.
Yeah,
He was mad that he did that to his father.
Yeah, so that was Fahrenheit 9/11, wasn't it? And then 11/9 was the one.
Yeah.
So they had always wanted the war, and 9/11 was just the excuse. It was not the cause. The U.S. sent an ultimatum. We have two ultimatums in this history. You have three allies, Germany, France, and Russia, and they sent an ultimatum to the United States. We learned that from the history of the Third Diadochi War, where they had three allies and an ultimatum up there. But you also have the United States send an ultimatum to Iraq, and the ultimatum requires, it's supposed to be Saddam Hussein, to step aside, or there will be war. Prior to that, there had been other demands. The disarmament of, the other demands, the disarmament. Iraq had fulfilled most of those demands. Okay. I want to quote January 2001. They are quoting the Treasury Secretary long before 9/11. I'm not quite sure what that means. Removal of Saddam Hussein. Is this the quote, Adriana? Do you know? It says, I want to quote January 2011.
What happened?
Never mind. I'll just keep going. This might be the quote from the Treasury Secretary. I'm not sure. The removal of Saddam Hussein is a priority to George Bush. It was all about finding a way to overthrow Saddam Hussein. He quotes the president as saying, "Go find me a way to do this." November of 2001, this is after 9/11. There is a conflict between Bush and Rumsfeld. Bush tells Rumsfeld, "What have you got in terms of plans for Iraq? I want a war plan. I want you to get on it. I want you to keep it secret." In January of 2002, they captured an Al-Qaeda trainer and they torture him. The CIA tortured him until he said there was a link between 9/11 and Iraq. February 2002, this is a Senator Bob Graham quote. "I was asked by a senior commander at Central Command to go into his office. We did. The door was closed and he turned to me and said, 'Senator, have we stopped fighting the war in Afghanistan? We are moving the military and our intelligence out of Afghanistan to get ready for a war with Iraq.' This is in early 2002. So this was a plan and an agenda long before 9/11. The terrorist attack was the excuse, but not the cause. An ultimatum was sent ordering them to give up weaponry. According to the United Nations, they were doing quite well under the program. But George Bush sends an ultimatum. He gives them 2 days to remove Saddam Hussein and his sons or face attack by 280,000 American and British troops. When the US invaded Iraq, they were attacking the sphere of influence of the King of the South. I want you to consider what we have been saying this last year. We have seen World War II and have made application. We have seen 2014, 2016, 2018, and Panium. We connected World War II into this history. We said that in 2016, you can mark the beginning of the war on what front? This is the beginning of the war on the Western Front in 2016. 2019 is the beginning of the war on the Eastern Front. Now, if I can find my way back here, I'll give you a chart. So this is the beginning of the war on the Western Front in our line, and then at Rafia is the beginning of the war on the Eastern Front. I still haven't perfected this, but I didn't realize this was going to happen where it keeps resetting. Okay, so when the U.S., where are we at there? 2019 is the beginning of the war on the Eastern Front. So what does that war look like? What does the Eastern Front look like? What are they fighting over? We have been increasingly saying that they are fighting over spheres of influence. It is all about spheres of influence. So from 2019, the Battle of Raphia, to the Battle of Panium, it is the Eastern Front of World War II, and they are fighting over spheres of influence. Many of us have seen the need in the last months to become familiar with history, particularly the last 30 years. We have watched documentaries, 30 years, and studied articles. We have gone searching to understand the rise of Putin, the rise of Trump. And as we've investigated, we have dug into some significant events. We will list some of them. We studied the Syrian proxy war. We have talked about Afghanistan as another proxy war. That has been ongoing. We have discussed the Ukraine and discussed Ukraine and Venezuela. We've even discussed the Arctic. All of these and others have been occurring in the recent history and in the history behind us. So what have we already been in? They have already been fighting over spheres of influence. They've been fighting over spheres of influence for the last 16 years, from 2003 and 2009 to 2019. So when we say that there is a war that starts in 2019 and they are fighting over spheres of influence, what does that even mean? They were already fighting over spheres of influence. How can they start fighting here when they have already been fighting for 15 years? So exactly what are we expecting to see in the Eastern Front of World War II? Panium is a war over spheres of influence, but the Syrian war is a war for sphere of influence Panium is a war over spheres of influence, but the Syrian war is a war for spheres of influence, as is Afghanistan, Ukraine, Venezuela, and the quarrel over the Arctic. Sure I'm following that sentence. There's a reason Trump wants Greenland. It's all about spheres of influence over the Arctic. We've been preparing for months, expecting to see this big event, and a war begins on November 9th, fighting for an area of influence. There's a problem. We're already in it. We entered into that war in 2003. From Vladimir Putin's election in the year 2000, he was attempting to work with the United States. He developed a relationship with George W. Bush. He was hoping that he would be able to work with George Bush and might have some mutual respect. By the way, after 9/11, the very first international leader to call George Bush and offer support and comfort was Vladimir Putin. How was he treated? George Bush did not care what Putin said about Iraq. He was going to have war. Despite the work of Putin to turn America away from this war, George Bush says he's going ahead anyway. There is an interesting documentary that many of us have watched. It's called Putin's Revenge by Frontline. You can see he is getting revenge on the United States for two altercations, two humiliations. One of them was the fall of the Soviet Union. The second was the war in Iraq. They state in that documentary it was the Iraq war that turned Vladimir Putin against the West. So from 2003 onward, in 2007, he is saying no one feels safe because of the behavior of the United States, overthrowing other governments without the authorization of the United Nations. It is a direct threat to his dictatorship. It is at this point, at the Iraq War, that he begins to push back. How? Spheres of influence. Now he's going to get involved in Syria. When the West tells Putin that he shouldn't be doing that, what does he say? He tells them not to preach to him because they invaded Iraq. He takes Crimea, and the West says that Putin is not welcome at the G8 because he invaded Crimea. He tells them that they invaded Iraq, and if they can do it to Iraq, he can do it to Ukraine. This has been his excuse ever since. When America did not recognize his sphere of influence, he turned against them. From 2003 forward, there is a developing struggle between the United States and the rule of Putin. Bush doesn't even know what he has done. He says they lost Putin, and he doesn't know what happened. He should know because it was because of Iraq. He has been in the Eastern Front as well as the West since 2003. This is the history of World War I. Austria-Hungary invades Serbia. Serbia's allies spring into action. Russia. This becomes a war between Germany and Austria-Hungary, which we have connected, and Russia. It stems from July 28th, 1914. Remember what we drew out here. This is all the principles as we've used for World War II. This history, 1899 to 1945, is what history? It is the alpha history of modern Babylon, the history of World War I and World War II. If it is the history, then it is. If it is this history, then it is a history of failure and making application to a history of success. What do you have to do to those final battles? You have to switch them. This is what we have done for World War II. We are identifying a history of failure and bringing that history to a history of success. We already do that internally. We know 1863 should have been the Second Advent. We overlay 1863 with the Second Advent, but we have to switch it. They failed. We succeed. We see the internal with modern Israel. We therefore have to switch externally with modern Babylon. Now this is really confusing because I don't have the chart on the screen that I'm talking about. Where's that? Go back to... Maybe it'll make more sense if I have this up. Okay, so this history. Is this right? 1899 to 1945. Okay, is what history? It is the alpha history of modern Babylon. The history of World War I and World War II, which is this history. If it is this history, then it is a history of failure and making application to a history of success. So what do you have to do to those final battles? It's really confusing when she's not doing it. Actually, I think that's what it is. You have to switch them. This is what we have done for World War II. Am I getting help from the chat here? No, that's something else. Okay. You have to switch them. So this is what we have done for World War II. We are identifying a history of failure and bringing that to a history of success. So we're taking this. Adriana, what's she talking about? If you're paying attention.
You have to flip it.
So.
Do you remember that chart that you made where the first one, everyone is in alliance, and then in the next one in the alpha history, it's King of the South against the King of the North, and the King of the South loses. But in the mega history, it's flipped.
How is she doing that with this chart though? Because this is what she was drawing on the board when she did that. I know what you're talking about though. I think I know with all the battles, right?
Yeah, it's the same idea. Just all she wants you to do is just take that idea over.
Okay, so she's just mentioning it, I guess, while she's drawing this and pointing.
Yeah, she's gonna mention it many more times, but you'll see when it gets to Lana. I think she's making it more clear. But
okay,
it's those technically the three. You have Ipsus, Raphia, Panium. Sorry. Ipsus, Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum. So those are the ones. We have that chart with King of the North versus King of the South and who wins. Those are the ones you have to flip. So we did that with World War II, remember? Because I think it was at Raphia you had the King of the North go against the King of the South, and the King of the North won, and that's wrong. That's an alpha history, so you have to switch that in our time, because you had Hitler go against Russia, and Hitler won a good deal out of it, and so you have to switch that. So
does everyone understand? Try to open up
We're works in progress.
Okay, so this is what she's talking about, is, if you guys don't remember, an alpha is a history of failure and an omega is a history of success. We saw Pyrrhus in Macedonia and Pyrrhus in Italy. And we see these battles, what happens here is basically just reversed in the line of success. So exact same thing happens in reverse. So it's a chiasm, basically. and we have it in Pyrrhus's Alpha and Omega history, and then we have it in the World War War II, World War III history. A chiasm in the battles, so the reverse happens, or the mirror, kind of, I guess. If anyone doesn't remember that, something in the chat there. Chiasm, exactly. Okay, so go back to the other one. Thought I had it all together, but I guess not. All right, so if we're going to understand World War I, we're using the exact same principles we use for World War II. World War I and World War II are part of the same alpha history of failure. World War III is not failure, it's success. Just like World War II, we come to World War I and we have to switch, just like we were just showing. So Germany and Russia have been fighting this battle for several years, about 3 years. Germany decides on a new tactic. They want that war on the Eastern Front to end. They decide on a very clever tactic. Germany identifies a man hiding out in Switzerland, Vladimir Lenin. He has been in a 10-year exile in Switzerland. Germany decides if they want to defeat Russia, the best way to do it is to orchestrate an internal revolution. They don't believe in this message, but Lenin has spoken favorably of ending the war. So Lenin has said that he wants to take Russia out of the war. And Germany says the best way to take Russia out of the war is to place Lenin in power. So Germany takes Lenin from Switzerland and they put him in a boxcar. They seal it. There are no windows. It is totally sealed, and they send Lenin through Germany and Sweden and into Finland. And Germany gives Lenin to Russia. Because they sealed the train, they don't have to legally recognize that it came from Germany. They cover their tracks. Germany finances his Bolshevik party, and 7 months later, on November 8th, he overthrows the government. Ludendorff, a German politician, says Lenin will overthrow the Russian patriots, and then I will strangle him and all his friends. This was a German plot. As this war has progressed, Germany has a plan. They finance Lenin. They send him through to Russia. Lenin overthrows the government under the promise of ending the war and restoring peace between Russia and Germany. He accomplishes the goal November 8th, 1917. Right here. So there has been conflict between Russia and the United States since 2003. So we're down on this line again. Ultimatum. But it is a history of failure. There is a battle in 2016 and we need to flip it. Who gave Trump to America? Russia. They were behind Trump. Russia supports him. It's all with a purpose to overthrow the establishment by a revolutionary leader from the inside. When does Trump do that? When we talk about dictatorship, we talk about November 9th. They voted November 8th. Trump said that we have this bad relationship with Putin and he can restore the relationship between the two countries. It is the same promise that Lenin made. Despite the war, Germany permitted Lenin and some of his friends to enter back into Russia in a sealed train. If you went to Berlin's Historical Museum, there are documents that will cover this affair. One German diplomat sent a telegram to Berlin. It said, "Lenin has arrived safely inside Russia. He is doing just what we want." He did that November 8th, 1917. So then he fulfills his promise and ends the war on the Eastern Front March 3rd, 1918. It is known as the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. As Lenin promised, he ended the war on the Eastern Front, but at a great loss to Russia. He lost his sphere of influence. By the terms of the treaty, Russia lost about 1 million square miles of territory, 1/3 of its population, a majority of its industry, including coal, oil, and iron. Lenin called this treaty the depths of defeat, dismemberment, enslavement, and humiliation. That was March 3rd, 1918. Okay, and we see Russia surrendering to Germany. So Germany had its own problems. They're still having troubles on the Western Front, regardless of the conditions on the East. The Western Front, they are not able to win. They are slowly worn down. And on November 11th of 1918, Armistice Day, Germany surrenders. As soon as they have surrendered, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk is canceled or annulled. Anything that they won in this treaty, they have now lost. World War I was finally over. Germany finally surrendered November 11th of 1918. All nations agreed to stop fighting while the terms of peace was negotiated. I want us to note that this is not the end of the war. All they have done is lay down their weapons and agree to stop fighting for a little while. The war is not formally ended until 1919 and the Treaty of Versailles. At the Treaty of Versailles, this is when Germany finally realized that to what extent they had lost the war. We call this a deadly wound at Paneum and the death at Sunday Law. The war does not end at Paneum. Then they have to realize just how badly they have lost. They have realized that at the Treaty of Versailles, so the Treaty of Versailles is in that is Sunday Law. And the armistice was at Paneum. Got it. So the deadly wound is here, and then the death is at Sunday Law. Yeah, that makes sense. So when we study this history, in the history of World War II, we understood that from 2016, where we marked the Battle of Ipsus forward, we have to start switching. One history leads to failure and another leads to success. One more time, we are going to work through application. We saw the Bosnian Crisis. This conflict is really between Austria-Hungary and Russia, but you also see two smaller powers, Serbia and Bosnia. This conflict is between the United States and Russia. There are two smaller countries, Iraq and Kuwait. In both histories, Russia cannot defend its sphere of influence. Because of the actions of the King of the North, terrorist organizations form with a hatred of it. The Black Hand attack Austria-Hungary. At 9/11, Al-Qaeda attacks the United States. Austria-Hungary sent an ultimatum to Serbia. The United States sent an ultimatum to Iraq. Europe thought that Serbia had fulfilled the majority of that ultimatum enough to avoid war. Austria-Hungary invaded anyway. Most of the world and enough of the United Nations believed that Iraq had done enough to avoid war. The United States invaded anyway. Russia responds. Putin responded to the Iraq war, which has led to much of the conflict we have seen in the last 16 years. Now we switch it because we are in the war. Germany sent Lenin into Russia. Switch that. Russia sent Trump into the United States. Lenin says he is going to end this war. He is going to make peace between Germany and Russia. Trump says he's going to end this war and make peace between the United States and Vladimir Putin. Lenin overthrows the government November 8th, 1917. Remember, it was called the October Revolution because they took so long to change their calendar to the Gregorian. By the calendar we use today, the October Revolution, or Red October, all took place in November. November 8th, he overthrows the government. November 8th, the people voted and Trump overthrew the establishment. Lenin fulfilled his mission by ending the war on the Eastern Front. He makes peace, but at a great cost. We need to consider this waymark. Which waymark? Lenin fulfilled his mission by ending war on the Eastern Front. He makes peace, but at a great loss. We need to consider this waymark.
It's Rafia. Russia lost, but in our line would be America loses a lot. Like Russia, on that video that I had, they lost like so much of their territory and their economic stuff. So that means what she's saying is we need to look at how much America is going to lose at Rafia.
Oh, so yeah, I didn't really make the connection earlier when we were talking, when I was...
Yeah, it's hard, but when you get it, it has huge implications.
So the amount that they lost a lot. They said like 1/3 of most of their industry, right?
Yeah, it was a huge loss. So that's why when I've been looking at this thing with Trump, I'm wondering if that means he's going to lose presidency.
Well, it's hard to say what it is because it's going to be on a more spiritual level, right? So it's something.
Well, if you want to lose spheres of influence, what's the biggest sphere of influence you could lose besides, of the whole nation? I don't know.
Besides what?
Well, like the whole America.
Oh, well, I mean, with what we see going on in Iraq right now in the Middle East, Iraq is now rising up against the country, and that was an important sphere of influence that the United States took from Russia.
Yeah.
And now with him pulling pulling out their defense. What is it? They're not defending the Kurds. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, because they're pulling out of Syria. And so when they're pulling out of Syria, all of a sudden, I think Turkey was like, well, here's our chance. They're right next door and they've been giving us trouble for so long. They're going right in. And the Kurds are just like this nomadic, really poor, homeless people.
Yeah. Well, there's a history there. I don't know if you guys,
I've seen that.
Between Turkey and the Kurds, right? And the only reason that they've held off is because the United States have kind of been in there.
Yep.
And the Kurds were an important ally during the Iraq War.
Yeah.
Both, I think. I can't remember. I know at least the last one they were. I remember.
Yeah.
That's how that was like I think their northern front, because the Kurds are in the north of Iraq, I think.
Yeah. So for this to help understand kind of what's happening, because it's confusing, because you have Austria, Hungary, and Germany both representing the King of the North. And they are representing the King of the North, except when the battles happen at Ipsus, Raphia, and Panium. When those battles happen, and Heraclea, those you have to switch. So it looks like it's the King of the South, but it's not, because it's an Alpha and Omega history, right? So you have Russia losing at Raphia, but in our time, the King of the North has to lose. And you have Germany losing at Panium, and even worse at Sunday-Law is completely dead. But in our history, you have to switch it so it's Russia losing at Panium and completely dead at Sunday-Law.
Got it.
So for the first part of the history, it's easy to keep them clean because you have King of the North and you have King of the South, and it's fine. But once you get to those battles, you have to flip them upside down.
Okay. Just having a look here, get my brain into the countries. Yeah, there's Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. Turkey's coming in here, and the Kurds would be up in the north. Cool. Lost my spot. All right. Where is it? Oh. Oh, I don't remember where my spot is. Okay. I think that's it. No, we just went through that. Okay, here we are. So, backtrack a little bit. Lenin fulfilled his mission by ending the war on the Eastern Front. He makes peace, but at a great cost. We need to consider this waymark. From a year ago, we are not looking at current events, and we are expecting this major hot war. Then we learn that it is not going to be a hot war, but an information war over spheres of influence. Now we learn that the war does not, it's not going to be a hot war. I keep forgetting about that. So that might be going on in the Middle East, but there's an election going on too. There's an election coming up too, and it could definitely have.
The Middle East is the only place that a hot war is allowed, because that's proxy wars and it's spheres of influence. So that when it comes to proxy war, there you do have a hot war.
No, I understand that. I'm just thinking about Raphia, because Raphia is not. We're expecting a hot war, but it's going to be an information war over spheres of influence. So it's not necessarily, Turkey going into northern Iraq, or
for it to be a thing would have to be one of their spheres of influence. But it's what it is Raphia is because Trump is pulling out completely out of Syria, which was the King of the South winning because the King of the South wanted to take Syria.
Mm-hmm.
That was the point. So the United States is losing that sphere of influence, and we had that set up in Heraclea. That was it was Syria he was pulling out of, and Afghanistan he was only pulling half the troop out of. He needs to pull everyone out of Afghanistan for it to be a loss of influence.
This is just what I'm focusing on here, though, because we learned that it's not going to be a hot war. It's going to be an information war. So I know all that's going on. I'm not saying it's irrelevant. I'm just saying that this is still has to be an aspect of, or the key aspect of what Raphia is, and information is going to happen more internally in the United States to affect their spheres of influence.
Over spheres of influence. Information war over the spheres of influence.
Yes.
So
but we know that the way the information war works is that what they do is they get their own people to turn on them, right? So it has to be Isn't that usually what Tess has been saying, is that the information war is that it's different than a hot war where your guys are fighting directly against each other, but the information war is where it actually comes from inside. It's an internal
That's
thing.
what it was in 1989. How
Yeah.
the United States got their people to turn against Russia.
Yeah. So I think that's going to be an important aspect. I think that's kind of what she's talking about. Over spheres of influence, I understand that.
That's why I'm confused, because the information in that sentence is to do with the spheres of influence.
Yeah, I understand.
So how would that work?
What I'm saying is it's not a hot war. It's going to be an internal thing. So if you look at, remember that link I sent you the other day about in Iraq where they were uprising against their own government?
I think so.
That's kind of the same thing. It's not, the thing is, it's not happening in the United States. It's happening in one of their spheres of influence where they're now going to topple the puppet government that the United States set up. So Russia's definitely on the move here. They've got an information war happening in there, because the only reason that people go into a revolution is usually because of some information, right? They have a reason to fight over their government. So it's not like a hot war. I wouldn't say a revolution is a war. It's a revolution. So I think that, I'm not saying it's definitely Iraq, but I'm saying if it's over an information war over spheres of influence, the way that that's going to turn out is that the people are going to uprise against their own government. That's what the United States did to Russia. No?
I don't know. I keep looking back at Heraclea, but the end result was that Russia won the spheres of influence at Heraclea because Trump was removing troops. And that was one of them. And then the other thing is he removed sanctions on Putin. So I don't know. But there was things leading up to that were like Trump making the National Cyber blah, blah, blah Act and some other stuff internally too. So I can see where you're coming with that over here in the US.
Is there a way in which we can see that Trump was, how was Russia involved with Trump pulling the troops out of Syria? Is there
that secret meeting?
With the one in?
Yeah, because remember the first time he made that security announcement, but it was like some kind of document, I don't remember. And then he refused to meet with Putin, and then he did another thing. He made the CISA, whatever that was, and then he refused to meet with Putin again. And you have, I don't know, was it Bill? I don't know who went over there with Putin, and Putin was like, the U.S. has been doing all these things that I can't consider friendly at all, and I don't know what happened because everything was fine, and now you're doing all this stuff that was to do with information warfare. So he put things in place so that Putin couldn't interfere with information warfare in the United States. So he was blocking him, and that was Trump's part of the instigation of that war. But then they had a secret meeting where Putin probably held something up in his face that Trump, I don't know, probably information. And then next thing you know, Trump says, we're going to pull out of Syria, we're going to pull half the people out of Afghanistan, and we're going to let go of sanctions on Oleg Deripaska, which was the Internet Research Agency guy, Putin's guy with the internets. So that's how that one played out. But that's why I've been struggling with this one, because I haven't seen Russia pulling the same kind of things that US did in Heraclea. So I've been wanting to see something like Heraclea, but I don't know if this is just like totally different in a way.
I expect it probably will be.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know I've missed so much, so I don't know if this is like just crazy, but in World War II, do they mention like Japan's involvement and like the propaganda that Tokyo Rose? Remember her? It was female broadcasters who were broadcasting information against the troops during World War II.
No, nothing about Japan or China yet.
But Japan was involved in World War II. That's why I'm just wondering. Yeah,
I know. I wondered that too. There was things going on with them in World War I, and there was big things happening with China, and then also there's a lot, like Pearl Harbor was a huge event in U.S. history, and we haven't seen that on the lines.
Okay, so that hasn't been brought in. I just thought of it because of propaganda and information and females.
I think,
so, you know,
I think probably because they're always trying to focus around the events that are going on between the King of the North and the King of the South.
Exactly.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things that happen. Maybe they will show up on a line for other reasons, but if it wasn't directly related to both, then it wasn't the war between, I mean, if you think of Pearl Harbor in the World War, the United States wasn't even the King of the North or the King of the South. It was Germany and Russia in World War I and World War II. So that was kind of like noise, more or less, for that story. Is that right?
Could be. I don't know what might come up later, but so far that's been the only applications we've had, and you can't bring the US doing its thing in this simultaneously right now, otherwise it'll get really confusing.
Okay, we'll carry on here. So now we learn that the war does not begin at Raffia, but it ends at Raffia. If we combine World War I and World War II, World War I says that there's been a war on the Eastern Front from 2003. Did I already read all this? From 2003 to 2019, Raffia. Here, November 9th, it ends. Peace. World War II says there's a war on the Eastern Front from 2019 to Panium. It ends at Panium. As we have studied this history, we have come to understand that it is all a war over spheres of influence. But we recognize that from the war in Iraq, they have been doing this in Syria and Venezuela and Ukraine, all over the world. What do you expect to see? I would suggest part B. We have already seen it. We've already been in it for 16 years. They don't start the war at Raffia, they end it because Trump came to power with the mission and with the promise that he could make friends with Putin. However, it is going to be at a cost. At a cost. At Panium, we know Russia loses. How is Russia going to lose? How did they lose in 1989? They are overthrown from the inside. At Panium, Russia loses. Everything that they gained is lost to them. As we have been recognizing, Panium is the beginning of the fall, and it is completed at Sunday Law. That is the death. Trump came to power promising a better relationship with Russia. He said the people are tired of conflict. It is the same promise that Lenin made. The war does not begin at Raffia. If anyone at this point has not yet realized the importance of knowing the external events and following the last 30 years of history, thinking you are about to what? To some, there's a word missing. Thinking you are about to come to some massive event and some huge change. That sounds right. I'm gonna put that in there. Thinking you're about to come to some massive event and some huge change, some whole front open in a new world war.
Whole other front.
Whole other?
Yeah, a whole other front open in some.
Okay. Some whole other front. Then what?
Open, what you were reading. Open up in a new world war.
Some whole other front open up in a new world order? New world war?
What you have, yeah. I'm pretty sure I remember her saying that.
Remember that we have been in it. If people can't have seen the last 16 years, it will be hard to recognize the conflict that is coming. A couple of final points before we close. The history of 1918. I don't want to go into detail, I just want to point it out regarding the breaking of the Republican horn. We have placed it in 2016 with the overthrowing of the so-called establishment. We have placed it at Raffia with the establishment of a dictator. We know we place it at Sunday Law. We can build a different logic for each argument. We can also identify how it progresses. The history of 1918 and the armistice, you see the dissolution of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. The two-horned empire comes to an end. We can identify the breaking of republicanism at Panium. We don't have Panium up there. So I know we are out of time, but there are just two more points I want to make. We have talked about the mode of warfare. We started with that subject this morning. The tactics used Think of World War I and World War II. In which war were the weapons developed? It was in World War I that those weapons were demonstrated. It is in World War I that they are all tested out. The inventions of World War I in weaponry, the tank, chemical weapons, machine guns, barbed wire, submarines. These had been in development before World War I, but it is in World War I that they go into service. Also blimps, which develop into aircraft. World War II is the same weapons, somewhat more developed. By the time you get to World War III in our history, you have the information age. You have Facebook, Cambridge Analytica. Those weapons become more powerful, but everything you find in World War II exists in World War I. So when we come to this history in World War II, Raphia to Panium, we are dealing with World War II. We want to see a new mode of warfare that is visible and already in service. It is World War I that demonstrates new modes of warfare. Final point, putting this to one side, I want to make an application. I don't want to go into detail. Again, we will just do it briefly. In the history of World War I, we see Germany as a kingdom, but you can also identify a king. We know all this history is Kaiser Wilhelm, the King of Germany. I want to make an application. Germany used to be divided in different smaller territories. In the early 1870s, 1871, Bismarck unites all those territories and unites the German Empire. This is Bismarck. His work was to unite Germany. And now a point that 8 months ago, many people would not have liked to make. Bismarck united Germany. He built the empire. If you wanted to give him another name, you would call him Antigonus. He was the unifier of the empire. Bismarck was known for all of his alliances. Europe was heading towards war. Many countries want a war. To prevent war, Bismarck forms these complicated alliances, diplomacy with different countries. This holds back a world war for decades. He does that work from around 1871, when the German Empire is established, until 1890. Then this arrogant young king called Kaiser Wilhelm takes the throne. Bismarck had worked under his father, but he essentially ran the country. Kaiser Wilhelm says he doesn't like Bismarck and considers him a threat. He decides he wants to rule alone. In 1890, he has Bismarck kicked out of government. Take 126 from 1890 and it takes you to 2016. You have a president, Obama. Obama was Antigonus. We have already discussed Antigonus. We have already been able to identify him as Clinton, but he was also Obama. I think, wasn't he also Trump in one of them?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was
Obama?
Obama?
III.
Yeah. What was Obama known for? Alliances. You see him with the G7 and with Canada, Germany, United Nations. He is known for his alliances. One such alliance that we should have defended was the Iran deal. That is just one where he held back war. In 2016, you have a new young ruler who wants a period of personal dictatorship. He kicks Bismarck out of government. Bismarck predicted that Kaiser Wilhelm would lead Germany into ruin. I want to quote some historical sources that describe how Kaiser Wilhelm ruled. I guess these are quotes. When he became king, he took Germany on a new political course, a period of personal rule. He began to damage the relationship between Germany and his former allies. He is noted for a peculiar behavior. Particularly, he meddled in Germany's foreign policies based on his emotions, resulting in incoherence in Germany's relationship with countries. Eerily familiar. So he is not consistent. He starts to damage Germany's standing. What did Trump just do at the G7? He says that he regrets the trade war. Then he backflips and says he didn't mean that. He says he should have been harder on China. He makes no sense. Kaiser Wilhelm made public blunders. One of the worst, he gave an interview to an English paper, said, "All you English people are mad. Mad as rabbits." England didn't know what to make of him. There are also allegations and scandals about sexual behavior of many within his inner circle. It is believed he had an altered state of mind. What particularly characterizes him is that when he comes to power in 1890, he believed he didn't need any of the alliances. He believed that he could rule Germany and prevent war based on his personal relationships with other leaders. He says he is friends with the Russian leader, and the Russian leader likes him and won't fight against him. He thought that every crisis would be managed based on his personal relationship. It is said he was out of touch with the working of international politics. This characteristic that he can rule based on his relationship and have peace with all the countries that like him. This is from the New York Times based on the G7. For Donald Trump, everything is personal. America is his personal brand. Everything for him is image-based, and it's the appearance of his personal relationships. When the Danish Prime Minister insults him, he says, "You can't treat America that way." Is there a lot left here? Holy smokes. Okay.
Just a little bit more.
I'm just looking at the scroll bar over here. It's like halfway. Anyway. The article says he wasn't talking to America. She was talking to you. She wasn't insulting America. She was insulting you. But when Trump rules based on his personal relationship, there is no separation between him, make this bigger, and the country. When you see him in his relationship with North Korea or Turkey or Putin or Britain and Theresa May, it has nothing to do with alliances and everything to do with how he sees their relationship, their personal relationship. That is the exact same mistake that Kaiser Wilhelm made. If you want to understand Donald Trump, combine the characteristics of Kaiser Wilhelm and Hitler, and the picture is perfect. But we should have appreciated Bismarck. We're not going to come back to this study. I know it may be confusing to say that the war ends at Raffia and does not begin. We have to connect both world wars to get the full picture. It is part A and part B. We know that what we have seen is very similar to what we are about to see. When it comes, we will understand what that looks like. We also know that the mere external event, as important as they are to follow, is not the test itself that we are facing. Please follow the external events. It's in following them that you will have faith in our reform lines and understand that these things are true. But the battle itself is not the test. We're going to leave the history of world wars, and when we come back, we will go into these other discussions. Is this? That's, oh, it's on there. That's why I accidentally copied and put it in there twice. There we go. We're done. Any questions?
Is there a pop quiz?
No, not on this one. I didn't have time.
Can I do it?
Yeah. Should I take the notes off the
I
board?
don't think it's gonna work though, because it's a little too confusing, this one.
Do it anyway. Let's see if anyone leaves.
Let's see the fish jump ship here. Okay. Who wants to go first? I want to see if there's any volunteers.
Us.
All right. When does the Eastern Front in World War I start on our line?
2003.
And when does the Western Front in World War I start on our line?
Is it for them?
Yeah. Do you guys know that Flukas family?
Thinking.
Oh.
Talking it out, they always meet their mic.
They're having a family conference. You don't understand.
No, I want to hear it. That's the whole, we want to hear the reasoning. Helps.
Oh, yeah. Oh, everyone's power's off, Susan. In California. Yes, you guys got it?
She says they both began at the same time in World War I.
Yep. Yeah, they both started in 2003.
What, the Eastern and the Western? Oh, you're going over that before.
Yeah, for World War I, they both started in the same spot. Let's see. Elaine, you want to answer one since your mic isn't muted?
Yeah, maybe not. I'll try.
When does the Eastern Front end in World War I on our line?
The Eastern Front of World War I on our line.
Yeah, when does it end?
Was it 2016?
No.
Then I don't know.
One more further?
One more further. 2017, is that what you meant?
No. The fingers. It's Rafia.
Okay.
The
Oh,
next.
yeah, Rafia. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. But then, I can't, because then you just give. Okay. Let's do a different kind of. Robert, unmute.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do we have to do with the battles for them to make sense in our line? Because World War I is an alpha history. What?
I'm gonna flip them.
That's right.
Mhm.
Exactly. Very good. So what was the application of Lenin going to Russia to bring it down and stop the war?
Same as Russia bringing Trump in, or
Yep. Nice. Look at you. Good.
He's ready to teach.
I know he is. He's got to stop messing around waiting for those supposed glasses that never come.
yeah, they ain't gonna be here either.
I'm going to start to try to contact your VA and see. But no.
He doesn't need glasses. He can go by memory, apparently.
Yeah. Who needs eyes anymore? Let's see.
Yeah, because we're walking by faith, not by sight anyways.
Yeah. Who are the two numbers there?
Ask them. Who cares?
Okay. Number 12536064240.
Ask your question.
Did you say 253? I have to unmute him, I think.
Oh, unmute them, please, Elaine. Who is that and those phones there? You guys are unmuted now. I can hear you.
Ask one a question. 25360 whatever.
Question. Let me see, because I didn't even have one ready to go. When does the Western Front end in World War I on our line?
That's for
253606. Oh, hold on.
Lana, you can't answer.
Well, it's no, that's not. See, that's when does the Eastern Front begin?
Let the phone people answer.
That's not the answer, though.
No, I know, but that wasn't either of the phone people even answering.
They might not want to.
Oh.
Yeah. They've been pretty quiet, so I want to poke them.
All right, ask the other one. 519, are you there? Maybe they can't hear us.
Elaine, do you know who they are?
Nope. I don't.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was muted. My phone was muted as well. I forgot.
There you go. Give her a question.
Okay, so the question is, what was the question? When does the Western Front end of World War I on our line?
Didn't you ask that already?
No.
No one answered it.
She asked when the Western Front begins on our line. Now she's asking when it ends.
I'm not sure.
Pick away, Mark.
2019.
No, that one keeps going. I think it goes to Sunday Law.
Yeah,
because
with the Western Front?
Yeah, because the Western Front is the front that Trump is fighting with the people of the United States, and he doesn't get complete dictatorship over everyone until Sunday Law, and then he gets everything.
But the Eastern Front begins at Rafia, right?
For World War
II.
II.
Do you have that chart? Put that chart up again so people know. Oh, I've got it right here, actually, if you want.
I can't see anything anyway.
Huh.
Well, we get to cheat then and you don't.
Because there's two.
Just kidding.
There's two different lines of Western and Eastern fronts, which I only became aware of a little while ago. The World War II Western Front and Eastern Front they start at different times.
I'm gonna move these out of the way because they're distracting. Go on. You're doing good.
So did we work it out? Is the World War I Eastern Front, Western Front, that's internal, and World War II is external, or is that just not?
I don't think that's, I think it's just Eastern Front is spheres of influence between Russia and US out there, like in the Middle East or Venezuela, Ukraine, Arctic, all of those places that she named. Because when she was talking about the Eastern Front here in World War I, that's what she was referring to, was those other countries, the spheres of influence where they've been fighting the battles.
So what is the difference between, if we're looking at them? There must be some distinguishing something between them. It's not just random everything.
No, it's this. That's, if you go back to her presentation, that's everything she was saying, was that what we're expecting to see start in World War II at Rafia is the eastern part of the war. But what are we expecting? Because this eastern part of the war, it's the same thing that's been happening since 2003. That's been happening with spheres of influence everywhere. Because we started to look at the history for the past 16 years, and we saw all these wars in the Middle East. And it's actually that the Eastern Front has been going on since 2003 between Russia, because we took Iraq from Russia. It made him angry, Putin, and it's never stopped with proxy wars over there in the Middle East. So exactly what's been going on over there, which was the Eastern Front of World War I, is going to keep going on from Rafia to Panium over there in the Middle East.
So,
but the Western Front in World War II, I think, is the same thing as the one in World War I, is just Trump fighting his own country.
But if we're looking at this, all we're saying is that the Western Front begins at 2003 and ends at Sunday Law. The Eastern Front begins at 2003 and ends at Panium. That's all you need then.
Yeah, so whatever we said about it so far, about what the Eastern Front and Western Front looks like in World War II, it's exactly how it's going to look like in World War I application. It's just the different times that it starts and ends.
But if it's a combination of both, then they just basically span the whole time between 2003 and Panium, and then the Western just goes a little bit longer to Sunday Law. It's not, you don't need 4 lines there. They both start at 2003, they run all the way through, and one stops at Panium and one stops at Sunday Law.
No, because the Western Front here starts at 2016. This one starts at 2003.
But that doesn't make sense if we're saying that it's the same thing. So they both started at 2003.
So you want them to be different?
No, I'm just saying, why do we have 2 start points for the same line and 2 end points for the same line?
I have a question. I think
it's not 2 start points though. Western Front in World War I starts in 2003, and it starts from the application. In World War II, it starts here. So this is just what World War II is showing us, and this is just what World War I is showing.
I'm talking about our line. So for our line, like, yeah, I know that World War I had a beginning point and World War II had a beginning point, but if we're looking at our line, the Western Front and the Eastern Front both start at 2003. They run all the way through until Panium, and then the Western Front goes just one more waymark forward. So they both just cover the whole period of time.
I know. I just have them and do different applications split up here.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to clarify. I'm not saying anything about how you have it.
So World War I application then, because I'm still trying to struggle with all this.
Elaine, you gotta talk louder. It's so hard to hear you.
World War I application, right?
Yep.
It's both at 2003. So the Western Front is within the United States then, just like on World War II, right?
Yeah. Should be. And I think that's what her point was, is that we've had information warfare going on in the United States. Because we had Cambridge Analytica and all those, her increase in knowledge line that was in Arkansas that I do have it down somewhere actually.
But is it Democrats versus Republicans? What is it? What is it? The Western Front of World War I.
I think it's
because we know in World War II it's Donald Trump going for all 3 branches of the government. He's at war with the United States. So Who are we saying is at war with each other in the United States at 2003?
Well,
because of what Bush did and against the wishes of everyone else?
See, that's where I see, that's why I was saying before that I thought it was external, because in 2003, you have the United States at war with Iraq. That's the year that, or with Russia, because that's the year that Putin said, okay, they've attacked my sphere of influence. I'm going to get them back. And so that's an external thing, whereas the Western Front on the World War II line is internal. It's where the United States is fighting, and where Trump is fighting the United States.
Yeah, but Tess said that the war in Iraq was the external part, was the Eastern Front part of it, not the Western Front.
Part of what?
The Iraq war and Putin and angry Putin and everything going on there, that was the Eastern Front.
So what started the Western Front in 2003?
I don't know that she made a clear application for that. The only reason she has them both starting there is because they both started at the same time in World War One.
I know, but we're trying to make application. That's all. Which video was it? I'll just go watch the video because I haven't even seen that one. I don't think, because I haven't seen any of this. It might just be easier just to watch the video.
What video?
Which one is she drawing those lines for 2000? Is it
the one you just did?
She gave the World War One.
Yeah, she said the Western Front and the Eastern Front both.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. Right.
It was easy to miss, and I missed it at first too. It wasn't until I went over it again later that I'm like, okay. I actually didn't catch it, and I emailed her and asked her, and she said they both start at the same time, and I'm like, oh, okay. And then I saw it in her presentation, and I'm like, oh, cool. Okay, I bugged her for no reason.
So when she was talking about that in this presentation, she was saying that, the war, it had always been going on. It seemed like these World War I ones were less important than the World War II ones, because she did talk about in some detail about the Western Front and the Eastern Front in World War II, a lot more detail than she did in the World War I. And I don't think we're going to get any more detail for the World War I.
I don't know if that's it. I think she had a ton of information to pack in here.
Well, we just went through it, and all I'm saying is that we heard a lot more about the Western and Eastern Front on World War II than we did on World War I from her. And I don't think we're getting anything else in regards to all this. So I think that, like what she's pointing out is the Eastern Front and the Western Front from World War I is pointing out that we can see this battle starting between the United States and Russia all the way back in 2003 and carrying all the way through. But we're seeing on the World War II line, we're seeing specific events with the election in 2016 being the Western Front. That was, I don't know how to explain it. I gotta think about it myself. I'm just trying to talk it out. I don't know. We all have to understand this in 1 month.
I think we're doing all right for all the time constraints we've all been under. The major test, I think, for our thing, external events, like she said, we have to watch external events and we kind of have to try to follow them, but they're not our test. Our test is internal. So our test is what we've been being tested over this autumn and summertime with everything that came out.
With equality and conspiracy theories.
Yeah, so that's our test. This is something we need to keep track of, because it's the thing when these waymarks pass and we see that it was correct and it happened, then our faith is strengthened in these lines. That's what she said these are important for. But our test internally is the other stuff. That's what's important for us for November 9.
What's really interesting, just an observation, is what we're seeing on the internal and external, how FFA is behaving and the things that they are saying, how Trump behaves and the things that he says. The very things that he says, he accuses others of, is what he's doing. And you see the same thing with FFA, the very same thing that they're accusing us of doing, they are the ones that are doing it. It's just amazing to sit back and watch that.
Yeah. Yeah, dictatorship is becoming really clear. It's really amazing. And I think it's interesting because I've been trying to look back through the Old Testament and try to understand some things. And I remember if I could find this video, I know it was one of the Germany ones, if someone was the one who's transcribed this. But I remember Parminder saying that worldliness, what worldliness looks to us now isn't what you eat or how you dress or what you watch on TV or any of this stuff. To us, worldliness is represented by the conservative part. And I was wondering how that works, because you have the whole Bible telling you how to dress and how to look and how to act. And it's a very conservative way, but I don't think we realize in the bigger scheme of things, outside of ourselves, there's a huge battle going on between Christ and Satan. And Satan starts to use a group to destroy God's people, and God has to make his people look completely different from that group. And so it was pagans in the Old Testament, and all the like stuff they were doing was all like pagan worship, and that's who Satan was using to draw God's people away from him. So God had to separate them from those people and make them look separate from them. But in our time, the deceptiveness and the trickiness of Satan, he's using conservative Christianity now against God's people. So now God has to bring us out of that mindset and out of those people, and we have to look separate from them. So I think it's crazy how it's been shifting behind the scenes. And if you look at it from video 33 in France and 34 were really good to help see the progressive line of it.
Don't you think that what he's doing too is purifying our heart inside? You know how it says that God's looks on the heart, not the outside, because you can make yourself appear to be a whitewashed pillar. You know what I mean? And people will hear the truth come out of your mouth. People can hear the truth, you know? And I think that's a big part of it too.
He's like, with this message, he shines a light on all the dark little nook and crannies of your heart where there's little, you know, superiority, little things that you hang on to where you think you're better than someone in something.
Yep.
And he knows how to just put the you know how when there's a prison break and a prisoner is running in the field and that huge spotlight hits you and it's like complete daytime in your eyes.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
He's got a good set of lights. He just knows exactly where to point them.
Yeah.
With this message, and it's like it hurts. It's not a good feeling at all. But
we have to adjust to the light when he pours it out. We're looking at the revolutions, not revelations. Looking at the revolutions, what you have at 2019, what I'm seeing is just the beginning of getting into those, is that's where you have Abraham Lincoln dies. That's where you have Kaiser Wilhelm dies. It's the end of a monarchy. But after that, then you have Napoleon and Lenin. So you're in the revolutions, the purposes of these revolutions, and the revolution began at 9/11, is the overturning of a government. So Raffia marks that overturning, if I'm understanding correctly. Raffia marks that overturning, and then you have the dictator rise.
Yeah, it's here and here and here, though it's slowly, because what she did, I don't think I put it on this line, but she has the horn breaking here and she has the horn breaking here.
Yeah, I saw that. I heard that when you read it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it keeps breaking more and more till it's completely broken here.
Yeah, so you've got the overturning of the government. What happens after Raffia is the counter-revolution. You have a time of preparation. That's what we're going to experience between Raffia and Panium. You have a time of preparation, and then you have a counter-revolution.
Yeah, so I'm still wondering what is going to happen, because this impeachment is going to do that. Whether it goes through or not, I'm wondering.
Isn't he talking about overthrowing that too?
He talks a lot about a lot of things.
Yeah.
He says many things that make no sense and shouldn't be possible, and yet somehow.
I know.
He said, I think what you're referring to is, though, he said he's going to bring in a civil war over this.
Yeah. He said that too.
Yeah, I heard it was going to bring a bank collapse or something too. Threatened the economy with it.
Could the spheres of influence be some of Trump's allies in the Republican Party? Because he has a lot of them. They're kind of half allies. They don't really like him, but they like the power. Just a thought. Because I'm thinking if there's some way that the impeachment, or if Putin releases something that would cause people to turn on Trump. I don't know why he would do that, though. If maybe he doesn't want Trump in power anymore. I don't know. I think he's liking him in power because he's making a mess.
The things that I've seen, though, from what the statements or the news sources I was looking at, is that they were saying Putin loves this because it's all he ever wanted, is to destabilize the United States. And if you take away Trump from the people who love him so much, who want to reelect him, like someone posted that today. I don't remember who was saying that guy, his number one fan from the religious evangelical party, is saying that it is our religious duty to reelect him in 2020 no matter what. It's going to cause a huge revolution, a huge shaking in the United States if he gets kicked out, I think, because it's going to angry his base like nobody's business, and it's going to cause a huge backlash. So I don't know. There's been a lot of commentators saying that Trump's impeachment process looks a lot more like Nixon's than anyone else's. So I don't know, but if it does, I can definitely see how Putin would be happy about it, because the destabilization that it would cause to the United States, maybe it will bring it in a downturn.
I think that Putin's been operating under this idea for a long time, because he to some degree understands the lines as well. He knows that a revolution weakens your country, and it was a big reason why he wanted Trump to be elected in the first place, because Obama was uniting the country, and that's not what he did. If he's trying to steal spheres of influence from America, he wants America to be weakened so that they're distracted and that they're weak. But Obama, it wasn't a time for Putin to attack the United States. So his way of attacking was meddling in the election to get someone in who was going to polarize the country. The United States has never been this polarized in its entire history. And so there's a potential for a revolution. Even if it's not a revolution, the people are polarized and they're against each other, and it weakens the country.
But do you realize what he's doing then? It's like when the fall of Russia happened, he took precise notes and did the same thing to the United States.
That's exactly what I said. Yeah, what I'm saying is that he knows
what on the inside.
He understands the lines, maybe not in the prophetic sense, but he knows what weakens a country because he saw it happen before, and I'm sure he understands Russian history. So all he has to do is go back and see that Russia's so many times has taken a humiliating hit and said that they would never let it happen again. And he's saying, I'm going to be the one that makes sure this never happens again. So he's using the same tactic that was used against them. And the United States has been using this tactic for a long time. So he's smart, Putin's smart. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he's quite happy to have Trump in power. So a defeat for the United States is really hard. Like the balance of it all makes it really complicated, because we know the United States is taking a hit at Rafia, or this thing leading up to Rafia. Well, the worst thing for the United States is Trump. So maybe he wins something, or maybe he gets extra power or something, because that ends up being a detriment.
Who?
Trump
does get extra power, because you have
increased
as a dictator, less restraint is put on him.
That's so so with Rafia, with this whole thing coming up, this impeachment, maybe he doesn't get impeached, and that's the worst thing for America, right? That's what weakens the country.
Maybe he won't resign like Nixon resigned. I don't think Trump will ever resign.
There's two separate things happening, though. Rafia is one thing, is based off of one line in one battle, and then the loosening of the restraints on a dictator is off of other applications. So I can see, because Trump right now is restrained politically, he can't say certain things because he's the president, even though he still tries to. If he loses that, I could see how he could use that against it and just really break loose with his words and really go nuts because he's not in that office anymore. And I could totally see how he could turn the Democrats into like really a huge enemy because they kick him out. So I could see it both ways. So I'm still wondering. But our external sources, from what I've seen, are saying that this looks a lot more like Nixon than Clinton. So we'll see.
I think that if the cross looked to the disciples almost like the opposite of what they were expecting, and if we're expecting Trump or the United States is going to, if we're expecting that Trump is going to take a hit, that because we expect Rafia to be a defeat, a defeat for the United States is a victory for Trump.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's and that's kind of the opposite of what we had expected.
I don't know, because the king of the north, the king and the kingdom, so the king of the north has to lose at Raffia.
But didn't Trump recently even say himself that he is the United States? He, like, there's this tweet where he says, "I, in my great and unmatched wisdom," and around that, those lines, somewhere in, I think within that week, his tweets, there was a sentence where he said that, where he was stating that he is America.
Wow.
Well, you read it, Jonathan read it in when he was talking about, was it the Danish when they mocked him, or?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was read where he took that as mocking the United States, and they're not going to mock me. You're not going to mock the United States. I don't know if that's the one you're looking at.
No, there was a tweet someone shared in the WhatsApp groups where he said, "I, in my unmatched wisdom." I think it was it over the immigration thing?
That was just the last couple of days ago. It was just pulling the troops out of Syria. It was over that he said that I, in my unmatched wisdom, did this. Or I don't remember how he said it. But
he said, "I will
this.
totally destroy and obliterate the economy of Turkey."
Yeah. I mean, it seemed like I'm maybe I don't know what's going on, but it seemed like from what I was seeing in the articles I was reading, that he did this knowing that they were going to come in and attack, and yet then he goes and says that I don't remember how he said it. He kind of has them under his thumb, so to speak, that he'll ruin their economy. What she just said, that he'll ruin their economy if they did. It's like, then why did you do it? Why did his only purpose is to just get the troops out because he said he was going to do it? Is that why he did it?
Well, that's Kaiser Wilhelm for you.
Crazy.
Yeah, she said he doesn't make sense. He rules thinking he's a brand and he's, everything, and he rules on the basis of personal relationship and personal vendettas. He makes no sense. She said what Kaiser Wilhelm did is make his foreign policies completely incoherent and wacky, and no one could understand what he was doing or why. It's the same thing Trump is doing.
At the same time, he's got a me-itis and an I problem, like Pharaoh.
Yep.
Are you guys okay to maybe close in prayer? Then I can shut this off and get the video, start working on the video.
Yeah, I gotta go.
Then I'll let somebody else pray since you guys can't hear me that well.
Okay, I guess I can pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you very much for bringing us towards to drink out of the river, out of the stream that you would like to feed us. Thank you, dear Father, for feeding us. Thank you, dear Father, that you have brought us out of the darkness, that we have stumbled upon such a great treasure. And dear Father, please bless our elders, bless the leadership of this movement. Give them wisdom. Give us wisdom and understanding, that we may understand further, and that we strive to be among the teachers. We strive to perform better. Give us wisdom, O Father, and give us success in whatever we're doing, and give us good night's rest. In Jesus' name we pray and we thank you. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.